Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Life podcast. We are so excited that you decided to join us today. This podcast is all about learning what it means to be disciples of Jesus who are making disciples of Jesus and all the ways that we can continue to grow in that. My name is Ben Cornick.
And I'm Cortney Asher.
And we are recording from Christ the Rock Community Church in Menasha, Wisconsin, where our mission is all about making disciples of Jesus. And so in our last episode, we got to talk about what is the mission of the church and what is that all about. And so if you missed that episode, we would encourage you to go back and listen to it. All these episodes can stand on their own, but it's really great when you go back and start from the beginning. It's going to make a lot more sense. In today's episode, we want to talk about what is a disciple.
Yeah.
I mean, we're throwing this word around a lot, but I think to most people, it just sounds like a really churchy word, right? And it's like this word that it's like, what do we really mean by disciple? And Courtney, just sort of a random question, but like growing up, when you heard the word disciple, or just, even before like we really did a deep dive in studying on this as a staff team, like what did that word mean to you?
Right. Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, when you say it now, I'm like thinking the band Disciple is what comes to mind. Like Disciple.
Like the hard rock band, right?
That was when I heard it, So growing up in the church, really, I don't feel like I was ever called a disciple of Jesus.
Yeah.
Or like made that distinction that I was a disciple. The command from Christ to go and make disciples of all nations, I kind of took that passage as like a missions passage, like go into like different corners of the world and share the gospel. I certainly wasn't thinking about myself as a disciple. I guess I would think of myself as like someone who loved Jesus, but I didn't really know about what that looked like, So how do I flush that out? Is that something that my life should reflect in all areas, or is that something I just do at church? Is that something that if it comes up and somebody asks me, like I'll defend the faith and say, yeah, I'm a Christian. But I guess I would have resonated more with the term Christian than disciple, and didn't really think about what does it mean to be a disciple. Yeah.
And I think that's the point, is that a lot of Christians don't really wrestle with this a lot, because I think most of us, it's not like we've really been taught like, hey, you're a disciple of Jesus. So then we're going, well, wait, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, I think most of us, like, we've heard terms like follower of Christ, Christian, believer, churchgoer, like we're part of the church. Like, there's a lot of terms that I think we use regularly. And I think most of us feel like we kind of know what they mean. But all of a sudden we start throwing around this word disciple. And it's sort of like, well, it's kind of an odd term. And the term itself really is coming out of this idea of a rabbi and their disciples. And so, like, if you're not familiar with Jewish history, like if it's been a while since you've brushed up on your Jewish history,
it's been a while since I have.
There was these people called rabbis. And the word rabbi meant teacher. And these were the kind of religious teachers of the day. Like today, like you might have like a preacher or pastor. Well, back then they would call him a rabbi. And what they would do is they would get these students that they'd call them disciples. Now, the reason it actually, because then some people say, well, why don't we just say student then?
Sure.
Why don't we just say student instead of, or apprentice rather than disciple? Well, the difference is that for a student or a disciple of a rabbi, the goal was to be exactly like the rabbi. And I think that's the difference. Like, it's not just learning information from them, it's learning an entire lifestyle from them. And saying, I'm going to live like the rabbi. So Jesus could have come in any period of history, in any place. And yet, through God's will, the place that he came was to Israel, in a time of history where Israel had rabbis and disciples. And he could have picked any kind of way to enter into society in his ministry. And he chose to be a rabbi for his ministry. And so I think that's why it matters to say, what is a disciple? And, but I also think like it'd be better to sort of get more brass tacks. Like what are the actual components of what it means to be a disciple?
For sure. Because if we don't know what we're shooting for, how are we going to know if we've gotten there, right?
Absolutely.
So if the goal is to be disciples of Jesus, does that mean I just attend church? Does that mean I was sharing before, occasionally share my faith? Or does that look, like you said, like a lifestyle change? I'm actually choosing to follow the rabbi, Jesus. I'm actually choosing to have my whole life look like how he would want it to look. I'm going to mimic what he does and how he spent his time. So, I think Jesus actually gives us an invitation in Scripture that helps outline for us what it should look like to be a disciple. So he has the invitation for his disciples at the time, right, to come and follow him.
Because that was a normal thing rabbis would do.
Okay,
Like they would
yep.
invite the disciples, like that's how you became a disciple of a rabbi. You didn't sign up
Okay.
for a class, or you didn't like go register online. Like
Yeah.
a rabbi had to come up to you and say, "Hey, I want you to come follow me." And so we actually have that in Scripture. So
that's great.
Would you be willing to share that with us? Like, what does that invitation look like? And like, how did Jesus invite those disciples to originally follow him?
Sure. Yeah. So we see the invitation in a couple places in Scripture, but specifically in Matthew 4:19, Jesus says, "Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men."
Yeah.
So what's interesting is he's saying, "Follow me," and then he's telling them exactly what he's going to do with them. It's not just follow me and you'll find out later. Follow me and you can decide if you want to stick with me or not, right? But he's setting this relationship up where he's going, follow me and I'm going to make you. I'm going to turn you into something. And what I'm going to turn you into is a fisher of men or a fisher of people.
Yeah.
And so that invitation then gives us our definition. It's someone who's...
Well, I was just going to cut you off really quick because what I'm thinking about, though, is like set the scene for me really quickly. Like, who is he talking to here and why is he using this language with them?
Sure, yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah, so he's talking to fishermen.
Yeah.
And literally at the shore, right? Like, hey, come follow me. And so he's performed this big miracle where he's saying to them, hey, like, I can do all things, right? And they have this huge catch, and it's this amazing, I mean, they're set up for life, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much money they would have had if they would have cashed in on that.
Yeah.
And then he literally says, okay, leave that all behind.
Leave it behind.
And believe that I have that in store for you in regards to fishing for people. So it's this imagery of like, I'm going to exceed your wildest expectations with the catch you're going to have here.
Yeah.
But I actually want you to leave behind the monetary gain of this world, right? And like we hear him say later, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me into this world where I'm going to change you into something else. I'm going to put you on mission with me to be a fisherman for people. So that invitation there is, to come follow me. So it's someone who's choosing to follow Jesus. And I'm going to make you someone who is going to be changed by Jesus into a fisher of people. So you're committed to the mission of Jesus. So it's this threefold definition that I think really makes sense if we think about, okay, how do I measure that then? Am I somebody who's following, being changed by, and committed to the mission of Jesus? So there's a few different levels of change that happen there. And I think in recent even church history, some of the gospels we've preached have alluded to this idea that we just make a decision for Christ. That we just say, hey, I'm just going to raise my hand, right? And then I've kind of got this golden ticket or this pass into the kingdom. And like, I'm not actually going to think about it until I get there then. But like, right, the end of my life, like this wild thing happened to me. And then the end of my life, I'm going to just go to eternal glory. And it's like an insurance policy. Then,
it's like life insurance, right?
Yeah.
Like you do the one meeting, you get it set up, and then you're like, okay, like I'm good.
Like I have
now,
insurance,
when
right?
I die, I'm insured both here at home and I'm insured in heaven.
Yeah.
That's kind of how people look at it.
So like based on this invitation then, like what kind of change should we expect, Ben? Like what does that look like for us to actually live the life of a disciple, and what kind of change do we need to have happen to go, I did make that choice. But it looks like these things flushed out.
For sure, because I think one of the things that we want to be really aware of in this podcast is that we're not trying to say we have found the elite form of Christianity.
Right.
Or that what we're saying is better than everybody else's, because a lot of what a lot of people have in any church is a lot of good things. Like it's not evil, it's not bad. We're talking about being intentional.
Yeah.
Like, so we're trying to get more focused, more dialed into like, what is this lifestyle Jesus is inviting us into? And so the lifestyle has to be bigger than just a moment of decision.
Right.
It would be a little bit like if somebody was like, I've decided to become a healthier person. I've decided that someday I'm going to be like in a really good physical shape. And then you'd be like, okay, well, what are you doing to like make that happen? And they'd be like, I've just decided. You'd be like, okay, so your life doesn't
I wish it was that easy, right? I've just decided to eat vegetables all the time.
Yeah, and just boom.
I'm not actually going to do it, but...
And so it's like, because you'd be like, well, what are you actually doing in your life? Like, you can't just decide and then somehow something's going to change. And so So what I find about when we become disciples of Jesus and we're living like disciples is that there are these three different kind of areas of change that we have to look at. The first one is our head level change. And this is really where we choose to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Our heart changes after this, but there's this sense where this head level change has to happen. And if you look through the scriptures, there's so many moments where Jesus is actually helping people with a head level change. So you've heard it this way, I say it that way.
Yeah.
You think this, I'm going to challenge you to think that. Or he'd
Right.
ask them a question where they're like, I don't really know how to answer that. And in Romans it says that it's that we're transformed by the renewing of our mind.
Right.
So like there is this head level change that has to take place, and it's really about our beliefs. It's about the worldview we hold. It's about the perspective we have about the world and ourselves and who God is. Like these are big questions, and there's a lot of people in the church who are still confused about who is God really, and what does it actually mean to be someone who follows him, and how should I actually view the events that are happening in the world. Like when we have that head level change, it makes all of that much more clear.
Yeah.
Then we would talk about a heart level change. And this is where we're being changed by Jesus.
Right.
Like we're being, the Holy Spirit is doing his work in our hearts and in our lives. And so there's a heart level change that's taking place. And so your thoughts are aligned with what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, but then your heart is aligned too. And that's really important because when you look at some of the scriptures that talk about the heart can be deceitful above all things. But yet it's the heart that has the desires that are put there by God that he wants to fulfill in us.
Yeah.
And then, it talks about how, the thoughts of our heart, like our heart has its own kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
And so our head and our heart have to be aligned. And, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so then that leads us to the next one, a hands level change. Now, I think that this is where some Christians really struggle to really figure out how do I actually get to work for the kingdom? Like, and can it be like holding open the door for people at church? Yeah, it totally can be.
Yep.
But there's other ways that we can serve people, and there's other ways that we can help disciple people that is really like action oriented. Because James said, faith without works is dead.
Yes.
So you it can't be a private faith that you just hold to yourself and say, well, I've had my head and my heart level change, and I'm just going to hold that all to myself.
Yeah. Or I'm just going to hope that somehow how I live rubs off on everybody.
I'm just sending out good vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that, isn't it? Sometimes
Some people
it
feel
feels
that
like,
way.
well, I made this choice, and then like everybody will just know if I just, am more like Christ, but I don't actually ever have to tell them the good news or the gospel, right?
Yep.
So there's got to be this missional change.
Yes.
Right? Where I'm doing something about it.
Yes.
And it's not works without the head change. It's not just I'm going to work my way, right? Because Christ said you cannot work your way to salvation.
Yeah, because some people focus on that too much.
Right.
Like they're like, okay, I'm out there doing the mission. Like, and Jesus said there's going to be people who come to me and say, Lord, Lord, we cast out demons in your name. We did miracles in your name. And he's going to go, yeah, but I never knew you. I never had your heart.
Right.
So he wants all of us.
Yeah.
Like he wants the whole person committed to who he is and his lifestyle. And, so someone who is following him, being changed by him, and is committed to his mission.
Yeah.
And all three levels of that head, heart, and hands level change, they have to happen. Otherwise, we really can't be living the intentional life.
Yeah. So can we say that, is it fair to say, because it's a threefold invitation and definition, that if we leave one of these pieces out, we're missing something of the fullness of Christ's invitation? Is that fair to say? That's a stretch, right? It's like a struggle to go, man, am I doing those three things in submission to God? Am I submitting my mind, and I've made this choice to follow? And then based on this choice, my heart's going to be changed. I'm going to allow God to work in and through me and to sanctify me, to bring him to be, me to be more like him, into his likeness. And because of that, I'm going to produce fruit. And it's almost like I can't not produce fruit, or I can't not be missional because of the goodness I've experienced in my heart change and my mind, my decision to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
I think it is, because then you have to say, can you just have one or two of those changes without having the other one? Like,
right. Yeah.
Can I just have the hands and the heart change, but I don't really need to like do a lot with my mind, or and what I find is that there's a lot of Christians and even a lot of churches that are usually good about one or two of them.
Sure.
And it can be sort of based on personality, and the church can kind of skew a certain direction. So some churches are really big about like, we really love to learn, like where we're going to fill our heads with all the biblical information. And some Christians and churches are like that. Some are really like, man, we're just really empathetic. Like we really care for people. We really want to change at that heart level.
Yeah.
And then some are really about the hands level stuff.
Right.
But I think that I mean, it's like a recipe. Like if you leave something out, if you leave out the butter, you leave out the eggs, you leave out the sugar, whatever it is, something's going to suffer then in that recipe.
Yeah, I've done that a few times.
Yeah, I have too.
Don't put me in a baking contest.
Yeah, when your banana bread comes out more like a banana pudding, and you're like, I don't think that's the way it was supposed to be. But that's what happens then. So I don't think you can leave any of these components out if you really want to live the intentional life and have that holistic way of following Jesus.
Yeah.
I think we have to have that tension of wrestling with all three of these at the same time in our pursuit of trying to be disciples of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's look at just a couple scriptures of what does the Bible say about this, right? So in regards to following, you got like John 12:26 says, anyone who wants to be my disciple, this is Jesus talking, must follow me, because my servants must be where I am.
Yeah.
And the Father's going to honor anyone who serves me. So I think like it's the same with the Spirit today, right? Like, are we where God is at work? Are we following Jesus and following the Lord so closely and serving him with our life?
Yes.
Because if you want to be his disciple, you got to do that. You got to follow after him.
Yeah.
I think about John 15:5, and this is this whole concept of abiding. And so at our church, in the intentional life process, we have the very first step is God time. And so being intentional about spending time with the Lord is our abiding time. And we want to encourage everybody to do that, because simply what John 15 says is Jesus saying again, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he'll bear much fruit. But apart from me, he can do nothing. Nothing. So you talk about the works thing, and it's like, man, I'm really not following Jesus if I'm not spending that time with him. And that's going to show in my fruit, because the works I'm doing are going to be essentially worthless, in vain. Right?
Yeah.
So that's super important. I think about being changed by Jesus, and you mentioned this passage a little earlier, just in Romans 12, 1 through 2. He's saying, I urge you to, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. And this is your spiritual act of worship. And so then how are we going to do that? He says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I mean, that is, and he's just telling you to do that, right? Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world.
Huge statement.
Oh, man. What does that look like?
Yeah. Because, if you think about it, then you're fighting against everything you've ever learned. And I mean, because like for some people, you've grown up in the church, so it's just more about learning how to maybe do this more intentionally than you have in the past. But like, we both have had seasons where we weren't followers of Christ.
Yeah.
And then we became one.
Right.
And but even if you were raised in the church, like there's areas in our lives for all of us where we actually are more in the pattern of this world than in the pattern of heaven. And Jesus is saying like, no, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I mean, well, Paul is writing this, but obviously God is like, this is God's will for us. And that's, the end of the passage is like, this is how you know you're doing God's will. This is how you're going to be able to find God's will for your life, is if you are resisting the pattern of this world and instead being transformed by the renewing of your mind.
That's so powerful, because how many times do we go, what is God's will for my life?
Yeah.
It's like, well, here it is.
Here it is.
Don't live in this world.
This is how we find out.
Deny yourself, be my disciple.
Yeah.
Okay, and so just real quick before we close up, like committing to the mission of Jesus, this third part of this definition, he wants us to be fishers of men. We get this really cool story of Zacchaeus in Luke.
Yeah.
And so Zacchaeus is a tax collector. He's a wealthy guy. He's not really well liked. But he hears about Jesus, and he wanted to see him. And he literally climbs a tree, because he's a short dude, right? And he gets up in the tree so that he can see him.
A wee little man was he.
Does it actually say that?
Yeah. Well, not in this version, but, the song, right? Like the Sunday school
there you
song.
go. Yeah,
A wee little man was he,
there
right?
There we go. Yep. Oh, my gosh. You want to sing that for us real quick?
No.
Yeah, okay. That's probably better.
I'm not going to do it.
Okay. But so Jesus finally gets to where Zacchaeus is, and Zacchaeus comes down fast, right? And he says, hey, I got to stay at your house today. So it's like he wants to be with Jesus. He had something about him is drawing him to Christ. Even though he's not, he's not the guy that everybody really likes. He's not the real soft, tender heart. He's tax collector. And in the time, it's like those guys. I mean, that's like how we think of insurance providers maybe today,
or even IRS people today.
IRS, yeah,
like,
I guess
I
you're
don't
right.
love that whole system. So
yeah. But so then the people around him are going, man, I can't believe he's actually going to go. I can't believe Jesus is actually going to go with Zacchaeus because this guy's a what? A sinner.
Yeah, he's a sinner. He's not one of us. Like he's not and it's pretty much like, Jesus, you can go to all sorts of people's house, but don't go to that guy's house.
Yeah, don't go to the sinner's house.
Yeah, and we all have people like that we just go like, that's the person, and yet Jesus is then saying like, no, this is exactly whose house I want to go to.
Right. And so then, Zacchaeus gives this gesture of like, okay, half my possessions I'm going to give to the poor. Like, I just want to give. I want to like change my life, right? He's like, this is like the change piece going, I want to follow you. Like, I want my life to look different. And of course, Jesus goes, to be with him, but he says, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. And he's just, he's bringing us back to that Old Testament language going like, this is a promised person in the kingdom. This is someone who like, I've come to seek and save. So it ends in verse 10, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the mission. If he came to seek and save the lost, and that's what Jesus came to do, he humbled himself into human form to come down and do that. Then if we're going to be his disciples, that's what it's all about. We have to be people that are seeking the lost and pointing them to Jesus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I love that because if you think about it, then the question we have to wrestle with is, are we a disciple? Like, so if a disciple is someone who, based on that invitation of Jesus, that he wants us to come follow him, and that he will make us into fishers of people.
Yeah.
We're someone who is following Jesus, who's being changed by Jesus, and is committed to this mission of Jesus, to seek and save the lost, which means that when we're disciples, the mission is happening. Because sometimes people will go, well, what about evangelism? It's like, well, a disciple will do the evangelistic work because we're committed to the mission of Jesus. So we have to wrestle with the question then, are we disciples of Jesus? And next week or next episode, we want to talk more about how we actually follow Jesus and what that really looks like.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Intentional Life Podcast. So thankful that you decided to join us. We hope that you join us next time. And until then, God bless you.
God bless. We'll see you next time.